The cold water streamed down her face, mixing with the tears already falling. Her blue dress, once impeccable, now clung to her body, revealing her prominent belly, her eyes, red and swollen, fixed on the man in front of her, who, with a mocking smile, poured the contents of a pitcher over her head. Around them, other men, in their perfectly tailored suits and bow ties, pointed and laughed, their guffaws echoing through the luxurious hall. One of them, with a watch that seemed to be worth a fortune on his wrist, leaned over the table, almost falling out of his chair from laughing so hard. Another, with his hand over his mouth, tried to suppress his laughter, but his eyes gleamed with scorn. The scene was a punch to the gut, a cruel portrait of humiliation, of pain exposed without shame. What would lead someone to such cruelty? And what would this woman, pregnant and drenched, do in the face of such malice? Now, I'm going to ask you to click subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories like this. The night in Palm Beach, Florida, promised to be a celebration. The Montgomery mansion, a true beachfront palace with its impeccable tropical gardens and view of the Atlantic Ocean, was in full swing. Luxury cars, like Porsches and Ferraris, filled the long circular driveway, their headlights gleaming like jewels in the darkness. Inside, the buzz of animated voices and the clinking of crystal glasses filled the air. It was the 50th birthday of Richard Montgomery, the real estate magnate, known for his incalculable fortune and volatile temper. Among the guests, the cream of Palm Beach society, men and women in designer outfits, displaying jewelry worth more than entire houses. Richard, a corpulent man with a smile that rarely reached his eyes, circulated among the guests, receiving compliments and toasts. His wife, Evelyn, an elegant woman as cold as marble, hovered by his side, a forced smile on her lips. Palm Beach is known for its luxurious mansions and high-end boutiques, a true paradise for the super-rich. In the midst of all this luxury and ostentation, there was a figure that stood out from the scene. Amelia, in her 20s and 7 months pregnant, wore a simple yet elegant blue dress that Richard had insisted she wear. Her eyes, usually full of life, were dull, laden with deep sadness. She had been Richard's personal secretary for almost 5 years, and her presence there among so many prominent figures was a mystery to most. No one knew what bound her to that man, who treated her with a mixture of contempt and possessiveness. Amelia was a woman of few words, but with sharp intelligence and impressive work capacity. She knew Richard's secrets like no one else, from his riskiest investments to his clandestine meetings. She was his shadow, the guardian of his darkest secrets. The party continued, with soft classical music and waiters circulating with trays of champagne and canapes. Amelia tried to blend in, but she felt the curious glances and whispers. She knew she was the center of attention, not for her beauty or elegance, but for her condition, a pregnant woman, alone, at a millionaire's party. The situation was, at the very least, unusual. Richard at one point called everyone's attention with a toast. He raised his baccarat crystal glass, and silence fell in the hall. "My dear friends," he began, his voice deep and powerful, "I thank you all for your presence on this special night. 50 years of life, 50 years of success, 50 years of achievements." He paused, and his eyes met Amelia's. A malicious smile appeared on his lips. "And speaking of achievements, I'd like to introduce you to one of my most recent." "Amelia." A murmur ran through the hall. Amelia felt her blood run cold. She knew something terrible was about to happen. Richard gestured for her to approach. With trembling legs, she walked towards him, feeling everyone's eyes on her. Her heart pounded in her chest. When she was beside him, Richard placed his hand on her belly, a gesture that made Amelia instinctively recoil. "Amelia is expecting a child," he announced, and a heavy silence fell over the hall. The murmurs began again, louder and full of astonishment. "And this child," Richard continued, his voice laden with a tone Amelia couldn't decipher, "is a surprise to us all." He looked at Evelyn, who was pale as a ghost, her eyes fixed on Amelia. The tension in the air was palpable. Amelia felt cold sweat, trickled down her forehead. She wanted to flee, to hide, to disappear, but she couldn't. She was trapped there, at the center of that stage of humiliation. Richard then signaled to one of the waiters, who approached with a pitcher of water. Amelia felt a shiver down her spine. She knew what was coming next, and it came. Richard took the pitcher and without hesitation poured the cold water over Amelia's head. The water ran down her face, wetting her hair and her dress. The tears, which she tried to hold back, finally rolled, mixing with the water. The laughter began, first timid, then louder, until it became an orchestra of scorn. The men in their expensive suits pointed, their faces contorted in expressions of mockery. Amelia felt the world spin. The humiliation was unbearable. She clutched her belly with her hands as if to protect the child she carried from all that malice. At that moment, something inside her broke, but something new was also born. A cold, relentless determination. She would no longer be the victim. She would rise, and Richard Montgomery would pay for it. Amelia felt the cold water on her skin, but what chilled her most was Richard's gaze, a mixture of triumph and contempt. The guests' laughter echoed in her ears, each guffaw a stab in her soul. She could feel the weight of their stares, the morbid curiosity, the silent judgment. It was as if she were naked, exposed, with her pain and vulnerability on display for all to see. That moment, which should have been a celebration for Richard, had turned into a cruel spectacle of public humiliation. She clasped her hands over her belly, feeling the tiny being inside her, and a strength she didn't know she possessed began to well up. It wasn't anger, it wasn't sadness, it was something deeper, more dangerous. It was the certainty that this would not stand. Richard Montgomery had crossed a line, and he would pay dearly for it. She raised her head, her eyes tear-filled, but with a new sparkle, a sparkle of defiance. The silence, which had once been scornful, was now one of expectation. Everyone expected a reaction, a cry, a feint, but Amelia surprised everyone. She took a step forward, water dripping from her hair, and her voice, though choked, rang clear and firm through the hall. "Richard Montgomery," she began, and his voice, which had once been so powerful, seemed to vanish. "You think you can humiliate me, break me, destroy me, but you are wrong." A murmur ran through the hall. Richard, who had been smiling, now had an expression of surprise on his face. Evelyn, his wife, watched the scene with wide eyes. Amelia continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "You kept me a secret, used me, discarded me. But what you don't know is that I have a secret that can destroy everything you've built." The hall was completely silent. All eyes were fixed on Amelia. Richard, visibly disturbed, tried to interrupt her. "Amelia, stop this! You don't know what you're saying!" But she didn't listen to him. She was in her own bubble of pain and determination. "You pride yourself on your fortune, your assets, your impeccable reputation. But what if I told you that all of it was built on lies, on fraud, on blood?" Those words dropped like a bomb in the hall. The guests began to whisper, to look at each other. Richard was pale, his eyes wide with fear. He knew Amelia wasn't bluffing. She knew his deepest secrets, the ones he had kept under lock and key for years. "I have proof," Amelia continued, her voice now a whisper, but one that echoed throughout the hall. "Proof of how you embezzled millions of dollars from your investors, how you bribed politicians to get licenses, how you used your influence to destroy the lives of innocent people." The atmosphere in the hall changed dramatically. Laughter and mockery gave way to shock and disbelief. The men who had previously pointed and laughed were now silent, their faces contorted in expressions of astonishment. Richard tried to approach Amelia, but she recoiled. "Don't come near me, Richard. I'm no longer your secretary, your puppet. I'm the mother of your child, and I will protect my child from you." She pulled a small flash drive from her dress pocket, which was wet, but the device seemed intact. "Everything you've done, Richard, is right here. Every illegal transaction, every bribe, every crime. And I'm going to hand this over to the authorities." Amelia's revelation was an earthquake. The hall, once the scene of a luxurious party, was now a scene of chaos. The guests, once so elegant and carefree, were now in a panic, some trying to leave, others calling their lawyers. Richard, the untouchable magnate, was in shock, his fortune and reputation crumbling before his eyes. Evelyn, his wife, watched the scene with an expression of horror, realizing that the life she knew was about to collapse. Amelia, despite being wet and exhausted, felt a strange sense of relief. She had freed herself from a burden she had carried for years. She had risen, and she had exposed the truth. News of Richard Montgomery's arrest spread like wildfire. Newspapers and TV stations talked incessantly about the scandal, about the magnate's fall, about Amelia's courage. The Montgomery mansion, once a symbol of power and wealth, was now a reminder of corruption and greed. Amelia, in turn, became a heroine. She did not seek fame, but truth. She did not seek revenge, but justice. She proved that even in the most difficult situations, truth always finds a way. Amelia's life changed dramatically. With the help of lawyers and some people who sympathized with her story, she secured a settlement that guaranteed her and her child a dignified and secure life. She didn't become rich, but she had enough to live peacefully and raise her child away from all the luxury and rottenness that surrounded Richard. She moved to a small house in a quiet neighborhood, away from the spotlight and ostentation. She found peace and a new purpose in her life: to be a mother. Her son, a healthy and beautiful boy, was born a few weeks later. She named him Noah. He was living proof that even in the midst of darkness, light always finds a way. Amelia, who was once a shadow, was now a strong and independent woman, ready to face any challenge life threw at her. She had learned that true wealth was not in money or power, but in integrity, courage, and love. And you, what would you do if you were in Amelia's shoes? Would you have the courage to expose the truth even at the risk of losing everything? Leave your comment below. We want to know your opinion. And if you liked this emotional story, don't forget to leave your like and share it with your friends. Your help is very important so we can continue bringing amazing stories like this to you. If you've made it this far, I've left a story that I'm sure you'll like. It's right here on the screen. Just click on this video that's appearing for you. See you there.